Welcome back to my Warhammer lore. In today's episode, we will be delving back into the realms of chaos. However, focused on one of the members of the Ruinous Powers. I, of course, am talking about the Blood God, Khorne. Now, all of the information for this video is being pulled from the latest army books, the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and of course, much of it from the Warhammer Fantasy novels. So, join me as we take a glimpse into the realm of skulls and witness the brass tower and the rivers of molten blood, and gaze upon the embodiment of rage and murder. That is Khorne. I will also, towards the end of the video, be discussing Khorne's demon legions, or at least some of the many numerous kinds there are, and their possible inclusion in Total War Warhammer 3. Now that is of course speculation, but very, very likely, in my humble opinion. But before we get into the Blood God himself, we should briefly talk about the Ruinous Powers as a whole, as we have not done so yet. Now, in our previous video on Chaos, which if you have not seen, I will highly recommend you do so, as I will be moving forward as if you have seen it. We have established that many things reside in the realms of chaos, but 4 entities dominate it in a way that far surpasses all others. These are the Ruinous Powers. For if emotion shapes the realms of chaos, then these 4 represent some of the most basic emotions and desires a mortal can have of any race or creed. In a way, they represent the perversion or extremity of these emotions, and are made all the more powerful for it, as not only do their own followers give them strength, but also their enemies, as they sometimes unwittingly call upon these forces and feed them with their raw emotions. This is one of the reasons that the Church of Sigmar preaches detaching oneself from vices and attachments that can spark intense emotion, and also why they have the Order of the Silver Hammer and their witch hunters combing the Empire, ever on the search for the next Chaos Worshipper, as they can in fact be anyone. And since we are talking about Khorne, perhaps we should describe exactly who or what he is, and what he desires, disdains, and hopes to achieve in the mortal plane through most assuredly violent means. The Blood God, Carnath, the Hound, the Lord of Murder, and the Hunter of Souls. These are all names for Khorne, and there are many more. As with most Chaos Gods, the worshippers do not necessarily know that they are worshipping this entity of rage. Most of them see him as just a war god of some kind. And that is in fact what Khorne embodies: anger, hate, rage, the desire to end another through violence, to spill their blood and dedicate their skull to his ever-growing throne. Khorne himself is said to resemble something close to one of his greater demons, Bloodthirsters, except on a much more significant scale. The description we get from the army book details this deity as a colossal figure, sitting atop a throne made of mortal skulls. His eyes burn red with hate, exuding the very emotion and burning bright. His face resembles something close to a canine's, but with humanoid characteristics. He is encased in brass armor and clutching his massive sword that could split continents with a swing. He is surrounded by flesh hounds, his favorite demons, which some would think of as bodyguards. But Khorne thinks of them as pets, as he needs no bodyguard, as he has never been bested in combat by anything, his rival Ruinous Powers included. The Blood God's domain is one of ash and, of course, blood. The very ground is covered in the dusty remains of the fallen, and illuminated by the molten blood that flows like water throughout this realm of violence. Only a single structure dominates the distance, that of the brass tower itself, home to the skull throne and the ruler of this piece of chaos. His realm is chock full of demons and followers that are ever spilling each other's blood and dedicating their skulls to their god, making this realm one of screams of anguish, pain, death, and of victory, as an endless war is fought amongst the warriors of the blood god for supremacy in their lord's eyes. All of this is as Khorne wills, as he abhors weakness and cowardice, and thus his followers value the same. For even though Khorne may appear to be a mindless killing machine, there is in fact intelligence behind those hate-filled eyes, and no time for more complicated emotions or plans. Only the strong are valued by the blood god, those that exhibit physical strength, valor, a desire for glory, and of course a thirst for destruction. And unlike many of his fellow Chaos gods, he does not value the lives of his followers, for if they die, they were unworthy to begin with. Now, that is not to say that he does not show favor on certain mortals, for there are plenty of examples of that. It is simply that, much like a popular saying from his zealots, it matters not from where the blood flows, only that it does. Meaning that worshippers of Khorne simply must spill blood in his name. Well, that is not entirely the truth, as the blood god does have a few tenets, much like his brethren, that his followers must strive for if they wish to earn his attention. The first is that Khorne abhors weakness, as we have discussed, and should one whom has caught his eye flee a battle or refuse a challenge, he would be disgraced in his lord's eyes, not something you want to happen, as the blood god seems to be much more creative when it comes to molding the flesh of mortals into a form that will serve his purpose with or without the mind attached, turning many failed champions into what we know as chaos spawn. Another tenet of sorts would be to always seek a bigger challenge, meaning that a true champion of Khorne should always be looking for a greater enemy to slay and dedicate to the skull throne. Even the skulls of rival followers will do, as whom can be the greatest challenge to a follower of Khorne than another of his kind? And finally, to spread destruction and fear in their wake. And this is kind of twofold, as often fear will beget wanton violence, something Khorne delights in, and also tends to draw the courageous and more worthy kills away from the chaff. And the more worthy a skull, the more honor the blood god will favor a champion with upon its dedication. Now, it is also important to note that not just the simple act of killing is not necessarily fueling the blood god, though it might have at some point. It requires the intense emotion associated behind the slaying, which ironically is also harbored by the enemies of the blood god towards his own followers. So in a vicious cycle is the blood god fueled as long as war takes place. And war will always take place, as he will always bring it. And we have kind of stumbled our way through the desires of the blood god at this moment, and those of his followers, but we have yet to discuss why would anyone want to follow this creature? He does not care for you. He will not actively bring challenge and death upon you. But to those who can survive this crucible, he rewards with power and strength of an unmatched potential. You see, some nations of societies of mortals are already predispositioned to follow Khorne simply through existing. I am, of course, talking about the harsh landscapes of Norska, where the rival tribes and the demons and beasts that exist have honed these people into champions of the dark gods, and not just that of Khorne, but he is perhaps the most followed. In addition, any of the other great peoples that live close to the Chaos Wastes, such as the Kurgan, the Hung, and many other tribes, also fall into this category, where strength and blood are the ways of survival, One does not talk their way out of annihilation, nor do they run from it, but meet it with an axe and a war cry. Many ogre tribes also fall into this category, and in fact Khorne, you might say, is the second most worshipped deity by ogres. Especially with the idea that might makes right, as well as some other foul creatures. The Cloven Ones, the Beastmen, the Children of the Dark Gods, of course, actively follow Khorne. Many unsuspectingly, or just out of existing, since they all tend to worship all of the Chaos Gods in one way or another. But there are those that do wholly dedicate themselves to Khorne's slaughter, and they are some of the most bloodthirsty and some of the most skilled in melee combat of their kind. But still, even these do not make up the entirety of the Blood God's followers. Now, what would drive a man from the southern lands, those of the Empire, Bretonnia, and the like, to follow the Lord of Murder? Well, as we have discussed, Khorne embodies strength, and in a way, honor. Something that many of the soldiers and knights of men train for and desire for various reasons. For instance, an Imperial soldier may reach out and ask for strength to see him through a particularly bloody battle in order to see his family again, cursing Sigmar and asking any who would aid him, only to have the Blood God deliver a boon and recruit a new champion into his fold, saving the mortal from one death, but ultimately sealing his fate to another. Or perhaps the noble knight, whom has been leading his life according to the tenets of the lady, only to have beastmen butcher his family while he is away. With a desire for bloody vengeance in his heart and a fury building as he embraces the rage, forsaking the teachings of the lady, and for the act of vengeance devoting his soul, possibly unwittingly, to Khorne. Now, these are just random examples I have come across in my research for the topic, but there are more concrete examples of individuals bracing this god of hate and fury for all kinds of reasons. The most obvious is Valkia, known now as the Bloody, as she was a Norscan tribeswoman whom, after the death of her husband and a desire for battle, led a pilgrimage of her people, whom she willingly sacrificed along the way, to the foot of the Chaos Gates and the realm of her god, Karnath. She, of course, died by the hands of Khorne's most hated rival, Slaaneshi demons, but her corpse was brought in his domain by his own demons, and the Blood God sculpted her flesh to a more pleasing form, that of what, in mythological terms, we would know as a Valkyrie, and essentially turned her into a demon princess. But she is, of course, a Norscan, so that is not entirely my point. But there is a further example of how Khorne is not as selective in the people he shows favor. As in one of the short stories accompanied with Valkia, a Empire captain whom has served a long career is fighting a northern incursion. In the process, he channels all his skill and fury as he is assuredly going to lose this fight. In the process, he cuts down some of his own men in his rage. After the battle, the Empire has retreated, and the dying are moaning and waiting for that final embrace. And it comes in the form of Valkia, whom is sent to the battlefield to dispatch the weak and take the strong. You would think she would select Norskins, and she does, some to offer their skulls at least, but as she approaches the dying captain, the enemy of her kin in a way, she instead sees something more pure, more akin to Khorne himself, and offers him a boon, a chance to live, of which he takes and becomes an agent of Khorne. And this example is often seen in many of the other gods as well, but is just one of the many, many ways that mortals are either unwittingly or through dire circumstance pledged to the dark powers. Now, I will say Khorne is the less likely to underhandedly, and I will say he probably never would purposely underhandedly recruit a follower. It is only through circumstance and through their own desires that they are recruited into the fold. He is not a schemer. He is not Tzeentch. He is not Slaanesh. He is not Nurgle even. He simply brings war and death, and in the process reaps skulls for his throne. So the point I was trying to make is that, of course, most people following the Blood God, or any Chaos God for that matter, would be considered insane. But there is a bit of a misunderstanding for followers of Khorne that they are all mindless murder machines capable of strategy and thought. And some of them are, in fact. But for every berserker, there are the tacticians, the true warriors that in a strange way have more in common with Bretonnian knights. There's almost a kinship there, a much darker kinship, but there is something. As they have a code of conduct they adhere to and will die by when given an opportunity to save themselves by going against it. Because it does not matter from whom the blood flows, only that it does. But these are, of course, the mortal followers of Khorne. And his demons are an entirely different story, and they are much closer to embodiments of the god himself, and therefore much more amplified in their hate and desire to destroy. And destruction is certainly what Khorne wishes to inflict upon the world. He desires death, he desires destruction, he desires anarchy in a way that many of the other gods do not. But it's at this point I should also mention that Khorne also, in addition to many of his other characteristics, he is one of the only Chaos Gods that abhors magic. It is a coward's weapon. And while he does not frown upon utilizing magical armor or weapons to make the killing more efficient or awe-inspiring, Blood God will not allow his followers to cast any magic. And in fact, in his champions and many of his demons, he has instilled a natural resistance to the effects of harmful spells. This usually comes in the form of a brass collar with his rune attached upon it. And it is this distaste of magic that really sets the Blood God apart from the other Chaos Gods. As the others employ extremely potent magic, Tzeentch most of all, but the others just as strong. But it is a testament to his strength that despite his lack of magic, Khorne is still a ruinous power, and the equal or better to any individual Chaos God in existence in combat. But enough about all of that. We've covered many of the tenets and many of the things I've set out to do when covering Khorne in this way. Now, let's get into the demons. At least some that appear in the army books, as there are many mentioned, and of course many machines and demon engines that I either could not find a great deal of lore on, or just mentions that they could exist, much like almost anything in the realms of chaos. So I will just be picking a few select demons to cover for this, and feel free to let me know down in the comment section if there are any that you would like to see covered, possibly in the future, as I might do a second video to this, or possibly some cumulative video once all of the Chaos Gods are released. Regardless, let's get into the demons of Khorne, and also how they might fit into a Total War Warhammer 3. And what better way to start than with Flesh Hounds? These canine-esque demons are the favored of the Blood God. They are utterly obedient and, much like their master, ever bloodthirsty and ready to kill. They can be quite large at 8 feet in length, with blood-red skin and bony protrusions along their back, and a multitude of additional gifts of Khorne. such as iron plates bolted into their flesh for protection, and even the most favored among them sporting 3 heads and resting at the blood god's feet. These are the hunters and pursuers of Khorne's demon army. They have a knack for finding and hunting down prey, and in addition to their natural protection as demons of Khorne, they also have the large brass or iron collars affixed to their throat. I say either because I've seen references to both, and honestly it does not matter, as the collars are forged by the blood god's hate for the arcane, and gives those who wear it almost an invulnerability to magic. However, these creatures are often gifted to loyal champions for their service. Much like anything Khorne gives, it comes at the cost of having to not only attempt to control the beast, but also not become its next victim, as there is no innate servitude bred into these demons outside of their creators. In battle, these hounds are either used to soften an enemy, perhaps in an entrenched position, as the flesh hounds have little in the way of intellect and fear nothing, allowing them to soak up ranged fire or charges from cavalry, allowing these slower demons to catch up and begin the bloodbath. But they also make excellent flanking troops. They are driven into a frenzy when the first enemy turns to flee the battle, turning their rout into a true gory massacre. Now, if we do in fact see fleshhounds in Total War, they will, of course, for reasons that should be obvious, function similar to any hound unit we currently have, which we have a multitude of hound units from various factions. So I would think that they would serve the same purpose. But I would like to see them with either a larger health pool and a larger melee skill stat to represent their more special nature. Think dire wolves, but on steroids. And also, of course, a huge magic resistance due to the collars around their neck. And if they include them, CA will have done the blood god proud. The next demon is the Bloodletter, the rank and file soldiers of Khorne. However, you should not be deceived as to their potency in battle, as one of these demons is easily worth a half-dozen men or more. They are humanoid creatures that stand taller than a man, but have a stoop to their form. Their skin is blood red and in fact drips wetly as they move. Their hair is black and wiry, which frames their face and tall blackened horns and milk-white eyes. Their body is wiry thin, but masks the strength of a demon, and they typically wear scraps of cloth and an assortment of bronze or brass armor pieces. In their hands they wield a sword called a Hellblade that is bound to their body and incapable of being removed while they live. It glows with internal fire and diabolical runes, and is said to be capable of sucking the soul out of its victims. These are terrifying creatures, and some of the best warriors in all of Warhammer, which is saying something, as they are certainly some of the most bloodthirsty. In addition to your rank and file bloodletter, there are also heralds of Khorne, essentially bloodletter captains of a sort, that lead other bloodletters into battle. In addition to being bigger and better, they also seem to grip those around them in a battle frenzy, also familiar to the followers of Khorne. Now, I do fully expect that if demons of Khorne are added to Total War, that bloodletters will be a must, as they are his standard troops. However, I do see these as more of an elite infantry, something on par with at least Chaos Warriors or better. They will have an interesting niche, and I see CA circumventing this issue by giving us tiers of bloodletters to file out his faction that were not necessarily in tabletop or even in the lore, but would make sense for Total War. Possibly even taking the Heralds of Khorne and making them a super elite infantry block, similar to Chosen, if they aren't heroes or army leaders. And speaking of the Heralds, if they are a hero unit or a lore choice, which I kind of like the hero choice, to be honest with you, but a lore choice might not be bad. I would love to see them as melee experts with some kind of frenzy-inducing mechanic in the units around them. The possibility even makes them more dangerous the less healthy the less health they have, as that is an interesting tidbit of lore that often is overlooked when gauging the demons of Khorne, as they become almost more excited at the idea of their approaching doom. And what would make them even more potent is if they gave them the ability to inflict a rampage on their enemies, forcing their enemies to fight to the death in a losing battle. It would be glorious if we were given that mechanic, and it just makes so much sense for Khorne to do so against those against him. And I would love to see it. I would love to see it implemented in some way, and I think that would be awesome if CA could do so. The next demon we are looking at is the Juggernauts of Khorne, also known as Blood Crushers, Soul Crushers, or the Feet of Khorne. A Juggernaut, much like its name implies, is an unstoppable behemoth of both demon and mechanical parts. They resemble a cross between a rhinoceros and a hound that has been covered in metal plate, blackened, of course, of the Skull Lord, and gifted with its protective properties. These are often used as mounts for the Chosen of Khorne, but it would not be unheard of for perhaps a regiment of Juggernauts to be used as a possible heavy cavalry. Hell, I could even see Bloodletters doing the honors, riding them into battle, as the little bit of lore we get on them does mention that a single Juggernaut could easily wipe out a village on its own. And with that destructive force, I would love to see CA give us a Khorne-themed cavalry unit. God, it would be beautiful. Of course, they would be super heavy cav. And I would like to see them as just that. Not shock cavalry, because I think they need the stats to sit and slay in melee. Possibly even giving them an anti-infantry or anti-large bonus would be applicable. Maybe even make two variants of these cavalry units to mix things up. CA does enjoy that, and I can see it happening. And unfortunately, that was a little short, but we don't have much to cover with Juggernauts as we do with these final demons of Khorne. The Bloody Ones, the Guardians of the Throne, the Lords of Skulls, or as we know them, Bloodthirsters of Khorne. These are the greater demons of Carnath, and the most feared of all the Blood God's legions. They are gargantuan creatures of towering muscle and fury. They each resemble their god in a way, as they may in fact be slivers of Khorne himself. They have a canine-like face and wear an assortment of bronze and iron plate that is riveted directly through their flesh and into their bones. They have two large bull-like horns upon their head and a set of leathery wings similar to that of a dragon's. They often wield massive axes forged in the hate of their god and blessed with his runes of slaying. It is also not uncommon for these creatures to make the peeled faces of the skulls they dedicate to Khorne and take said flesh and wear it upon their armor. or even have a whip fashioned from Slaaneshi cultists that they use as a weapon, that are cursed to be in eternal torment as they writhe and wail with each crack of the whip. These are legends of combat that, of course, do not rely on any kind of sorcery other than those gifted through weapons and armor. They also are highly intelligent, despite their more savage appearance, and are some of the best generals in the Warhammer world, as they instinctively know the necessary tactics to achieve victory, and can almost feel innately the battle as it ebbs and flows, allowing them to be in the best position to whet their blade and turn the tide, if necessary. Now, it should also be of note that while intelligent, Bloodthirsters are also completely single-minded and relentless. So when they are given a task, they will pursue said task to its end at all costs, and possibly ignore other situations that come up that might be more advantageous. It is for this reason that I am not exactly decided on where the Bloodthirsters should be placed in Total War. I would love to see them as generals. That would make sense and it would be awesome, as that is what they do in the lore. But that also, I think they would just make fantastic single entity monsters, especially because during the end times we got different versions of Bloodthirsters. We had different legions, as they were referred to, making them a shoe-in for different variants on a single creature. But then again, the same thing could be achieved as making them the generals of an army. Either way, they should be unstoppable giant powerhouses with huge axes and possibly an aura of frenzy. As in the lore, at least, they often induced that in both friend and foe. And perhaps that is something that makes the Khorne campaign special. There's a lot of give and take. A lot of, you better set your troops up early to get them into the fight, because they're probably going to go crazy with bloodlust and you won't be able to control them anymore. It's very similar to how the Lizardmen wore up until some of the more recent patches. Regardless, I would love to see Khorne inside Total War. I hope and I pray that it happens for Warhammer 3, and it would be so fantastic if they could make that happen. And I hope you enjoyed this video, because I will be ending my dive into the blood god Khorne of the Ruinous Powers. One of my favorites of the Dark Gods. Maybe not the favorite, but one of my favorites. Also, probably one of the more unique entities in just Warhammer in general, with the dichotomy of honor and destruction. There's many facets to the Ruinous Powers in general that make them interesting. But I am not worthy of servitude at the Skull Throne. And if you believe that I have left something out, do feel free to include it in the comment section, and I will do my best to rectify that in a future video. Also, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Khorne and his possible inclusion in Warhammer 3. So leave those down in the comment section as well. And lastly, if you have not yet liked this video or subscribed to the channel, do feel free to do so. Please do, as it will greatly help me out and help more content like this be made for your viewing pleasure. Now, if you have not yet seen my Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay campaign, The Rise of the Forsaken, I have been airing it on the channel. Please also give that a try. If you enjoy Warhammer, I am making this very lore appropriate as much as I possibly can. I think that you might enjoy this story as it live play unfolds, especially if you are into any roleplay mechanics, any roleplay sessions like Critical Role or things of that sort. Of course, we're not professionals by any means, but I think I do a pretty good job. So check it out, guys, if you haven't. There will be a link in the description if you are interested. And remember, it matters not from whom the blood flows, only that it does. I've been Jumbo Thick. Thank you for watching, and I am looking forward very much to seeing you in a future video. Have a good day.